The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty trading post, and Sarah Mitchell pressed her trembling hand against her stomach, wondering if she had made the greatest mistake of her life by coming all the way to Wyoming territory in the spring of 1876 with a secret that could destroy her chance at a new beginning before it even started. She had answered the advertisement 3 months ago, back in Philadelphia, when desperation had driven her to seek any escape from the scandal that threatened to consume her. The letter had been simple, direct, and strangely kind. James Callahan, rancher, age 26, seeking a wife to help build a life in the growing town of Sweetwater. He had been honest about the hardships, the isolation, the demanding work. Sarah had written back immediately, her hand shaking as she penned the words that would change everything. What she had not written was the truth about her condition, about the child growing inside her, about the man back east who had promised her everything and delivered only shame before disappearing into the night. The stage driver opened the door, and Sarah gathered her worn carpet bag and the small trunk that contained everything she owned. Her dark hair was pinned beneath a simple bonnet, and her green eyes scanned the wooden buildings that lined the single main street of Sweetwater. Somewhere among these rough structures and weathered faces was the man who expected to meet his mail-order bride, the man who thought he was getting an untouched woman ready to start fresh. Miss Mitchell. The voice was deep and warm, and Sarah turned to see a tall man stepping forward from the shade of the trading post porch. He wore dusty work clothes, a worn hat pushed back to reveal sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His face was strong and honest, with lines around his eyes that spoke of long days under the sun and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though at the moment he seemed nervous. Mr. Callahan. Sarah's voice came out steadier than she felt, and she managed to meet his gaze even as guilt twisted in her chest. James, please. He stepped closer, reaching for her trunk with an easy strength that spoke of years of hard labor. The ride out was long, I imagine. You must be exhausted. It was quite a journey, Sarah admitted, following him toward a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient horses. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street, and the air smelled of dust and pine and something wild that she had never encountered in the city. James loaded her belongings with careful efficiency, then turned to help her up onto the wagon seat. His hand was calloused and warm, and when their eyes met, Sarah saw kindness there that made her throat tighten with unshed tears. This man deserved better than a bride carrying another man's child. This man deserved the truth. My ranch is about 5 miles out, James said as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. It is not much yet, but I have been building for 3 years now. The house has 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, and a view of the mountains that makes every hard day worthwhile. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking over the rutted road that led away from town. The landscape opened up around them, rolling grassland stretching toward distant mountains still capped with spring snow. Sarah had never seen so much open space, so much sky. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. I want to be honest with you, James said suddenly, his hands steady on the reins but his voice carrying an edge of vulnerability. I know this arrangement is not conventional. I know you do not know me and I do not know you, but I promise you this, I will work hard to be a good husband. I will protect you and provide for you. I will never raise my hand to you in anger, and I hope that in time we might find something real between us. Sarah's heart clenched, and she knew she could not wait another moment. If she arrived at his home, if she stepped over that threshold as his wife without telling him the truth, she would be building their entire future on a foundation of lies. She could not do that to him, no matter how desperately she needed his protection and his name. James, stop the wagon. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but he heard the urgency in it and immediately pulled the horses to a halt. What is wrong? Are you ill? His concern was immediate and genuine, and that only made what Sarah had to do harder. I need to tell you something before we go any further. She turned to face him fully, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop their shaking. "I should have told you before I came. I should have written it in my letters. But I was afraid, and I was desperate, and I convinced myself that perhaps it would not matter, or that I could explain when I arrived, or a dozen other foolish justifications that now seem impossibly selfish." James's expression grew serious, but he did not look away. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." Sarah took a deep breath, tasting dust and fear. "I am already with child, 3 months along. The father was a man in Philadelphia who promised to marry me and then vanished when he learned of my condition. I have no family willing to take me in, no prospects, no future except shame and poverty. When I saw your advertisement, I saw a chance at something better, but I should have told you. You deserve to know what you are getting if you marry me. You deserve to choose with full knowledge." The silence that followed was the longest of Sarah's life. She watched James's face, saw surprise flicker across his features, then something deeper and more complex. He looked away toward the mountains in the distance, and Sarah prepared herself for rejection, for anger, for the long ride back to town, and a stagecoach journey to nowhere. When James finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "This man who left you, did he hurt you, force you?" "No," Sarah said honestly. "I believed his promises, I believed we would marry, I was foolish and naive, but I went to him willingly." James nodded slowly, still looking at the horizon. "And the child, you want to keep it?" "Yes." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "I know it will be hard, I know it complicates everything, but yes, I want this child. Then I am already a father." James turned back to her, and Sarah saw no anger in his eyes, only a determination that took her breath away. "If I marry you today, that child becomes mine. Not by blood, but by choice. And I do choose it, Sarah. I choose both of you." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks before she could stop them. "You cannot mean that. You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. I know you are brave enough to travel 1,000 miles alone. I know you are honest enough to tell me the truth when you could have hidden it. I know you are strong enough to protect your child even when the whole world turned against you." James reached over and gently took her hand. "I wrote that advertisement because I was tired of being alone, tired of building a future with no one to share it with. I wanted a partner, someone to face the hard times and the good times beside me. You need a husband and a father for your child. I need a wife and a reason to make this ranch into something more than just a place to work myself to exhaustion. Maybe we can help each other. Maybe that is enough to start with." "I do not deserve your kindness," Sarah whispered, but her hand tightened around his. "Everyone deserves kindness," James said simply. "And everyone deserves a second chance. What do you say, Sarah? Will you marry me, knowing exactly who I am and exactly what I am offering?" Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something she had stopped believing in: hope. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I will marry you." James smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face and made Sarah's heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with fear or desperation. He released her hand and picked up the reins again, clicking softly to the horses. "Then let us go home. We can go back to town tomorrow to see the preacher and make it official, but tonight I want to show you the ranch, show you what we will be building together." The sun was beginning to set as they crested a low hill, and Sarah got her first view of what would be her new home. The ranch house was solid and well built, constructed from local timber with a wide porch that faced the mountains. A barn stood nearby, along with several corrals where horses moved lazily in the golden light. Everything was neat and cared for, speaking of a man who took pride in his work. "It is beautiful," Sarah said honestly, taking in the sweep of land that rolled away in all directions. "It is isolated," James countered, helping her down from the wagon. "The nearest neighbor is 4 miles away. Town is 5 miles in the other direction. Winter gets hard up here, and there are days when you will see no one but me and the animals. It is not an easy life, Sarah." "I did not come here expecting easy," Sarah replied, meeting his eyes. "I came here hoping for honest and real. I think perhaps I found that." James carried her trunk inside while Sarah followed with her carpet bag, stepping into a home that was spare but comfortable. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and windows that let in the last golden rays of sunlight. Everything was clean and organized, but it had the feeling of a space occupied only by a man living alone, with no softness or decoration to make it feel like a true home. "The larger bedroom is through that door," James said, setting her trunk down carefully. "You should take it." "I will sleep in the smaller room." "We are to be married," Sarah said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks but needing to address the practical realities of their situation. "We will need to share a room eventually, will we not?" "Eventually, yes, if you want that," James agreed, his own face flushing slightly. "But there is no rush, Sarah. I meant what I said about wanting something real between us. That takes time. I am in no hurry, and you have been through enough without me adding pressure or expectations." The thoughtfulness of his words made Sarah want to weep again, but she held herself together and simply nodded. "Thank you for everything." "You must be hungry," James said, clearly relieved to move to practical matters. "I am not much of a cook, but I can put together something edible. Sit, rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Sarah sank into one of the sturdy wooden chairs at the table and watched as James moved around the kitchen with easy competence, pulling out bread and cold meat and setting coffee to boil. The domesticity of it felt strange and comforting at once, and Sarah found herself studying him in the lamplight, this man who had agreed to take on not just a stranger as a wife but another man's child without hesitation. "Why did you really say yes?" she asked softly. "After I told you the truth, why did you not send me back to town?" James paused in his work, considering the question. "My father died when I was 12, he said finally. "Thrown from a horse, broke his neck, gone in an instant. My mother was left alone with 3 children and a farm that was barely surviving. People in our community could have helped. They could have made sure we had enough to eat, could have given my mother work or offered support. Instead, they gossiped about how my father must have been a poor provider, how my mother must have done something to deserve her fate. They let us struggle and suffer because it was easier than offering compassion." He turned to face Sarah, his expression serious. "I swore then that I would never be that kind of person. I would never turn away someone who needed help just because their situation was complicated or because helping them was not easy. You came here looking for a new start, Sarah. Who am I to deny you that just because your past is not perfect? None of us have perfect pasts. Your mother," Sarah said softly. "What happened to her? She remarried eventually, a good man who took in all 3 of us kids and treated us like his own. My sister and brother are both married now, living back in Kansas. I came west because I wanted to build something from nothing, wanted to prove I could make it on my own." He smiled slightly. "But it turns out building something alone is not nearly as satisfying as I thought it would be. I want to share this with someone. I want children running around this ranch, want to teach them to ride and work the land, want to build something that outlasts me. This child I carry," Sarah said, placing her hand over her stomach. "It will be born in the autumn, probably October. I will need help as my time approaches. I do not know anything about birthing babies on a ranch miles from town. There is a woman, Clara Henderson, wife of my nearest neighbor. She has birthed 5 children of her own and helped deliver half the babies in this county. She will come when your time is near, and I will not leave your side." James brought the simple meal to the table and sat down across from her. "You will not face this alone, Sarah. Not anymore." They ate in comfortable silence as darkness fell completely outside the windows. Sarah felt exhaustion pulling at her, the result of weeks of travel and stress finally catching up with her. When James noticed her eyes drooping, he immediately stood and brought her trunk to the larger bedroom, lighting a lamp and pulling back the quilts on the bed. "Sleep as long as you need," he said from the doorway. "I will be up early to tend the animals, but there is no need for you to rise before you are ready. Take time to rest and adjust." "James," Sarah stopped him before he could leave. "Thank you for giving me a chance." I will work hard to be a good wife to you, I promise. I believe you, he said simply, and then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Sarah changed into her nightdress and slipped between the quilts, which smelled of soap and sunshine. The bed was comfortable, the room peaceful, and for the first time in months she felt something like safety. She drifted to sleep with her hand resting on her stomach, thinking of the cowboy who had looked at her situation and seen not a problem but a family already beginning to form. Morning came with the sound of a rooster crowing and the low of cattle in the distance. Sarah woke disoriented for a moment, taking in the unfamiliar room and the slant of sunlight through cotton curtains. Then memory rushed back and she rose quickly, dressing in one of her simple work dresses and braiding her hair with efficient movements. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found James already back from his morning chores, heating water for coffee and setting out breakfast fixings. He looked up when she entered and his smile was warm and genuine. "Good morning. I hope the rooster did not wake you too early. I keep meaning to find a way to convince him to sleep later, but he is stubborn." "I am used to city noises," Sarah said, moving to help with breakfast. A rooster is actually rather pleasant in comparison to street vendors and carriage wheels on cobblestones. They worked side by side, falling into an easy rhythm that felt natural despite their newness to each other. James talked about the ranch as they cooked, explaining his plans for expanding the herd, his hopes for building a better irrigation system for the vegetable garden, his dreams of eventually having enough horses to sell breeding stock to the cavalry. "I should warn you," he said as they sat down to eat. "People in town are going to talk when we arrive to get married. A mail-order bride is enough to get tongues wagging, but when you start to show, there will be those who do the counting and realize the baby came too early to be mine by conventional timing." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "I am prepared for that. I want you to know that I will claim that child as mine from the moment the preacher pronounces us married," James said firmly. "Anyone who has anything to say about it can answer to me. You are my wife, and that is my child. That is the story we will tell, and that is the truth as far as I am concerned." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again. She seemed to cry so easily these days, emotions running high from the pregnancy and the massive changes in her life. "You are a good man, James Callahan." "I am just a man trying to do right," he replied. "Now finish eating, we have a wedding to get to." The ride back to Sweetwater was pleasant in the morning cool, and Sarah found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the wagon, the warmth of the sun, the presence of the steady man beside her. They talked more easily now, sharing stories from their pasts, learning each other's histories and hopes. James told her about growing up in Kansas, about learning to ranch from his stepfather, about the wanderlust that had driven him west after his mother passed away. Sarah spoke carefully about her childhood in Philadelphia, her father's death from illness, her mother's remarriage to a man who had made it clear that Sarah was an unwelcome burden in his home. She talked about working as a seamstress, about the loneliness of city life when one had no real family or connections. She did not talk much about the man who had fathered her child, and James did not press. That part of her past was closed, sealed away like a book she had no intention of reopening. The church in Sweetwater was a simple white building at the end of the main street, and Reverend Thomas was a kind-faced man with silver hair and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. If he was surprised by James arriving with a bride in tow, he hid it well, ushering them into the cool interior of the church and calling his wife to serve as a witness. The ceremony was brief and straightforward. Sarah spoke her vows in a clear voice, promising to honor and cherish this man who had chosen to see her not as a fallen woman but as a partner and a mother already caring for his child. James's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love and protect her, to stand by her in hardship and joy. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them married and suggested James could kiss his bride, there was an awkward moment where neither was quite sure how to proceed. Then James leaned in and pressed a gentle, chaste kiss to Sarah's lips, barely a brush of contact, but it sent warmth flooding through her nonetheless. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Callahan," the Reverend said warmly, shaking James's hand and then Sarah's. "I hope you will both be very happy together." They signed the register, made official what had begun with letters and hope, and then they were stepping back out into the sunshine as husband and wife. Sarah looked down at her hand, at the simple gold band James had produced from his pocket, and felt the weight of it like a promise made tangible. "There is a general store," James said. "I thought we might pick up a few things, supplies you will need, anything you want to make the house more comfortable. I want you to feel like it is your home too, Sarah, not just a place you are staying." They spent the next hour in the store, and Sarah found herself enjoying the simple domesticity of choosing fabric for new curtains, selecting seeds for a kitchen garden, picking out a few basic necessities. James was generous without being overbearing, encouraging her to choose things she wanted while offering his own suggestions based on what worked well in the harsh Wyoming climate. The storekeeper, a plump woman named Mrs. Davies, was openly curious about the new Mrs. Callahan, asking questions with barely concealed nosiness about where Sarah was from and how she and James had met. James handled it smoothly, explaining about the letters and the decision to marry, deflecting the more intrusive questions with polite firmness. As they were loading their purchases into the wagon, a man approached, tall and lean with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. "James Callahan, heard you got yourself a wife. Congratulations." "Thank you, Marshal." James turned and placed a hand on Sarah's back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive in a way that made her feel cherished rather than owned. "Sarah, this is Marshal Tom Bradley. He keeps the peace around here, though truth be told, there is not much peace to keep most days." "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Callahan," the Marshal said, tipping his hat. His eyes were sharp and assessing but not unkind. "Welcome to Sweetwater. I hope you will be happy here." "Thank you, Marshal," Sarah replied. "It is a beautiful country, that it is." He turned back to James. "Wanted to let you know there have been reports of cattle rustlers working the area about 20 miles north of here. Might want to keep an eye on your herd, make sure you are not losing any stock." "I appreciate the warning," James said seriously. "I will be vigilant." They finished loading the wagon and headed back to the ranch, arriving in the early afternoon. Sarah spent the rest of the day beginning to make the house feel like a home, hanging the new curtains, arranging her few personal belongings, planning where she would plant the kitchen garden. James worked outside, but he checked on her frequently, bringing her cool water from the well and making sure she was not overtaxing herself. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that seemed impossible in their vividness. Sarah felt the baby flutter inside her for the first time, a sensation like butterfly wings against her internal walls, and she gasped softly. "What is wrong?" James was immediately alert, concern in his voice. "Nothing wrong," Sarah assured him quickly. "The baby moved." "I felt it move for the first time." James's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on wonder. "May I?" He gestured hesitantly toward her stomach. Sarah took his hand and placed it gently where she had felt the movement. They sat in silence for several moments, and then it came again, that tiny flutter, and James's eyes went wide. "I felt it," he breathed. "I felt our child move." The possessiveness in those words, the way he claimed the baby as his own without hesitation or qualification, made Sarah's heart swell with an emotion she was not quite ready to name. She had come here expecting at best a marriage of convenience, a practical arrangement to save her from ruin. What she had found was a man with a capacity for love and acceptance that humbled her. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that was demanding but satisfying. Sarah threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, cleaning and organizing, sewing curtains and tablecloths, planting the kitchen garden with herbs and vegetables. James worked the land and the animals, rising before dawn and often not finishing until after dark, But he always made time to sit with Sarah in the evenings, to talk and laugh and slowly build a relationship that went beyond their practical arrangement. The physical attraction between them grew gradually but undeniably. Sarah found herself watching James when he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders, the capable way he handled the horses, the gentleness he showed with the newborn calves. She caught him watching her too, his eyes following her movements as she worked in the garden or prepared their meals. But he never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. They still slept in separate rooms, but the door between them felt less like a barrier and more like a courtesy as the days passed. Sarah found herself wanting to close that distance, wanting to truly be his wife in every sense, but she was not sure how to bridge that gap, how to signal her willingness without seeming too forward. One evening in early July, the heat of the day still lingering even as the sun set, Sarah made her decision. She had been James's wife for nearly 2 months, and while he had been endlessly patient and kind, she wanted more. She wanted the closeness and intimacy that came with a true marriage. The baby was growing larger inside her now, her stomach beginning to swell noticeably with the pregnancy, and she knew she needed to act before she became too self-conscious about her changing body. After supper, as James headed toward his room with a soft goodnight, Sarah gathered her courage. "James, wait," he turned, concern immediately crossing his face. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong." Sarah twisted her hands together, then forced herself to stop and meet his eyes directly. "I want you to sleep in my room tonight. I want to be your wife fully, James. I want us to have a real marriage." She saw several emotions flash across his face: surprise, desire, concern, and something tender that made her breath catch. "Sarah, you do not have to do this because you feel obligated. I told you I was willing to wait." "I am not asking because I feel obligated," Sarah said firmly. "I am asking because I want to, because somewhere in these past weeks I have come to care for you deeply. Because when I imagine my future, I see you in it, not as a convenient husband but as a true partner. Because I want to share everything with you, including this." James crossed the room in 3 long strides and cupped her face gently in his hands. "I have been half in love with you since the moment you had the courage to tell me the truth in that wagon. I did not want to rush you, did not want you to feel pressured. But if you are sure, if this is truly what you want, then yes, I want to be your husband in every way." He kissed her then, not the chaste brush of lips from their wedding day, but a real kiss, deep and searching and full of restrained passion. Sarah melted into it, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I am sure," she whispered, and James swept her into his arms, carrying her to the bedroom they would now share. The night that followed was tender and passionate, James treating her with a reverence that made Sarah feel cherished and desired despite her pregnant body. He explored her changing shape with gentle hands and murmured words of appreciation. And when they finally came together, it was with a rightness that felt like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. Afterwards, lying in his arms with her head on his chest and his hand resting protectively over her stomach, Sarah felt truly at peace for the first time since she had discovered her pregnancy. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I did not think I would ever say those words again, but I love you, James Callahan." "I love you too," James replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You and our child, my family." Summer deepened, the days growing long and hot. Sarah's pregnancy progressed, her stomach swelling obviously now as the baby grew. True to James's prediction, there were whispers in town when they went for supplies, sidelong glances and barely concealed speculation about the timing of the baby. But James handled it all with calm dignity, his hand always at Sarah's back, his support unwavering. In mid-August, Sarah was working in the kitchen garden when she heard horses approaching fast. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw James riding hard toward the house with 2 other men following. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his posture. "Sarah, get in the house," James called as he reined in his horse. "Lock the doors." "What is happening?" Fear spiked through her, but she was already moving toward the house. "Rustlers hit the Henderson place last night, took 20 head of cattle and burned their barn. Marshall thinks they might be working through all the outlying ranches." James swung down from his horse, his rifle already in his hand. "These are the Henderson brothers, going to help me stand watch tonight in case they come here." Sarah wanted to protest, wanted to beg him to leave the cattle and just hide with her, but she could see the determination in his face and knew it would do no good. Instead, she nodded and hurried inside, watching from the window as James and the 2 other men positioned themselves strategically around the property. Night fell, and Sarah waited in tense silence, unable to sleep, jumping at every sound. The baby kicked restlessly inside her as if sensing her fear. Hours passed with agonizing slowness, and Sarah prayed to any god who might be listening to keep James safe. The attack came just after midnight, the sound of gunfire shattering the quiet darkness. Sarah crouched below the window, her heart hammering, listening to shouts and the thunder of hooves and more shots. She wanted desperately to see what was happening but did not dare show herself in case a stray bullet came through the glass. The fight seemed to last forever but was probably less than 10 minutes. Then came a long silence, broken finally by James's voice calling her name. "Sarah, it is safe, you can come out." She flung open the door and ran to him, not caring about propriety or caution, needing to see with her own eyes that he was unharmed. James caught her against his chest, and she felt the rapid beat of his heart, the tension still thrumming through his muscles. "Are you hurt?" She pulled back to scan him for injuries, her hands running over his chest and arms. "I am fine. We drove them off before they could get to the herd." James held her close, his face buried in her hair. "I am sorry you had to go through that. I am sorry I could not keep you from being frightened." "You are safe. That is all that matters." Sarah held him tightly, feeling the baby kick between them, as if even the child was relieved that its father had survived. The Henderson brothers stayed until dawn, making sure the rustlers did not return, and then headed back to their own ranch to assess the damage. James spent the day reinforcing their defenses, setting up better warning systems, and Sarah spent it trying not to think about how easily she could have lost him. That night, as they lay in bed, Sarah curled against James's side with his arm around her. "I was so afraid," she admitted softly. "I just found you found this life. I cannot bear the thought of losing it." "You will not lose me," James promised, his hand stroking her hair. "I will always fight to come back to you, Sarah, always." August faded into September and the ranch settled back into peace. The rustlers had moved on to easier targets, and life resumed its normal patterns. Sarah's pregnancy advanced steadily, her belly now large and round, the baby active and constantly moving. She grew more uncomfortable as her time approached, finding it hard to sleep and difficult to do many of the tasks she had managed easily before. James was unfailingly patient, taking on extra work around the house without complaint, rubbing her aching back in the evenings, and making sure she rested as much as possible. He had sent word to Clara Henderson, who had promised to come and stay when Sarah's time drew near. In the 3rd week of September, Sarah woke in the middle of the night to cramping pains in her lower back and abdomen. At first she thought it was just more of the uncomfortable aches that had plagued her for weeks, but as the pains grew stronger and more regular, she realized with a mixture of excitement and terror that the baby was coming. "James," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "James, wake up. It is time." He came awake instantly, years of ranching making him alert in seconds. "The baby, are you sure?" "The pains are regular and getting stronger. I think we have some hours yet, but yes, I am sure." James was out of bed immediately, pulling on clothes and lighting lamps. "I will ride to the Henderson place and get Clara. Will you be all right here alone for an hour?" "I will be fine," Sarah assured him, though her voice shook slightly. "Just hurry back." James kissed her fiercely and then was gone, and Sarah heard the thunder of hooves as he rode out into the darkness. She focused on breathing through the contractions, timing them as they came closer and stronger, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong in childbirth, especially out here miles from any doctor. True to his word, James returned within an hour, Clara Henderson riding behind him on his horse. Clara was a capable, no-nonsense woman in her 40s with warm, brown eyes and strong, gentle hands. She took one look at Sarah and immediately set about preparing for the birth, sending James to boil water and gather clean linens while she examined Sarah and spoke to her in calm, reassuring tones. "You are doing just fine, honey," Clara said. "First babies take their time usually. Might be morning before this little one makes an appearance, but everything looks good. You are healthy and strong, and this baby is eager to meet the world." The hours that followed were the longest and most difficult of Sarah's life. The contractions grew stronger and closer together, the pain building until it was all she could focus on. James stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, letting her grip his fingers until they must have been numb, murmuring encouragement and love. Clara coached her through each stage, her experience and confidence a steady anchor in the storm of pain and fear. As dawn light began to creep through the windows, the urge to push became overwhelming, and Clara positioned herself to help guide the baby into the world. "That is it, Sarah. You are doing beautifully. One more big push now." Sarah bore down with everything she had, James's hand tight in hers, and then suddenly there was a release of pressure and the sound she had been waiting for, the sharp, indignant cry of a newborn baby. "It is a boy," Clara announced, quickly clearing the baby's airway and wrapping him in a clean blanket. "A fine, healthy boy." Sarah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and overwhelmed, and then Clara was placing the baby in her arms. He was red-faced and squalling, his tiny fists waving in the air, and he was the most beautiful thing Sarah had ever seen. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my son." James leaned over them both, his own eyes wet, and gently touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The baby's fingers immediately closed around James's, gripping with surprising strength, and James laughed shakily. "Our son," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Our beautiful boy." "What will you name him?" Clara asked, beginning to clean up while giving the new parents a moment with their child. Sarah and James exchanged a look, and Sarah realized they had never discussed names. "I had been thinking Thomas after my father," she said tentatively. "But I want you to choose too, James. He is your son as much as mine." "Thomas Callahan," James said, testing the sound of it. "I like it. Thomas James Callahan after both our fathers." "Thomas James Callahan," Sarah repeated, smiling down at her baby. "Welcome to the world, Thomas." Clara stayed for 3 days, making sure both Sarah and the baby were healthy and teaching Sarah the basics of nursing and baby care. James was a constant presence, holding Thomas whenever Sarah needed to rest, changing diapers without complaint, and gazing at his son with such obvious love that Sarah fell even deeper in love with her husband. On the morning Clara prepared to leave, she pulled Sarah aside. "That man of yours is special," she said quietly. "I have delivered a lot of babies to a lot of families, and I have never seen a father more devoted than James is to that little boy. Whatever the circumstances of Thomas's conception, that child has a real father now, and do not you ever doubt it." "I know," Sarah said softly, watching James walk the porch with Thomas cradled carefully in his arms, talking to the baby about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together. "I know how lucky we are." The autumn weeks passed in a blur of feeding and diaper changes and stolen moments of sleep. Thomas was a good baby overall, but he still demanded constant attention, and Sarah marveled at how completely her world had narrowed to this tiny person and his needs. James threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to ranching. He would walk the floor with Thomas in the middle of the night when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until Thomas settled. He built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and carving a pattern of horses along the sides. He talked to Thomas constantly, narrating his day and his plans and his dreams for their family's future. One evening in late October, as they sat together on the porch with Thomas sleeping in Sarah's arms, James cleared his throat. "I have been thinking about the ranch in the future. I want to expand the operation, maybe bring in some sheep along with the cattle. It will mean more work, but also more profit. I want to build something substantial to pass on to Thomas, and maybe to other children if we are blessed with them." Sarah smiled, her free hand coming to rest over James's. "I would like more children, brothers and sisters for Thomas. A house full of noise and love." "I want that too," James said, squeezing her hand. "I want everything with you, Sarah. A big family, a successful ranch, growing old together, watching our grandchildren run through these fields." "It sounds perfect," Sarah whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. Winter came to Wyoming with fury and beauty in equal measure. Snow piled high around the ranch, and temperatures plunged far below freezing. James had prepared well, with plenty of hay stored for the animals and wood stacked high for the fires, but the isolation was intense. For weeks at a time, they saw no one but each other, snowed in and cut off from town. Sarah found she did not mind the isolation at all. Their little family felt complete and perfect in their warm house while the wind howled outside. She and James grew even closer during those long winter months, learning each other's habits and preferences, building routines and traditions. Thomas thrived, growing chubby and healthy, his eyes turning from infant blue to a bright green that matched his mother's. Spring returned in 1877, and with it came visitors. Marshal Bradley rode out in early April to check on them, pleased to find them all healthy and well. Clara Henderson came to visit with her youngest daughter, bringing gifts for Thomas and admiring how much he had grown. Even Reverend Thomas and his wife made the journey once the roads were passable, blessing their home and exclaiming over the baby. Sarah slowly built friendships with the ranch wives in the area, women who understood the isolation and challenges of frontier life. They shared recipes and advice, helped each other with big projects like canning and preserving, and provided the kind of female companionship Sarah had not realized she was missing. In June, James came in from the fields with a letter that had arrived with a supply delivery from town. Sarah saw immediately from his expression that something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "It is from the attorney back in Philadelphia," James said slowly. "The one who handled selling your mother's things after she passed. He has been searching for you to deliver some news." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What news?" "Your stepfather died 3 months ago. According to your mother's original will, which superseded his claims, her house and savings come to you. It is not a fortune, but it is a substantial amount. Enough to expand the ranch significantly or invest or save for Thomas's future." Sarah sank into a chair, her mind reeling. She had not thought about her stepfather in months, had written off anything connected to her old life in Philadelphia. "I do not want his money," she said quietly. "I do not want anything that connects me to that life." "It is not his money, though," James pointed out gently. "It was your mother's, meant for you all along. He just kept it from you, and think about what it could mean, Sarah. We could build that addition on the house you have been wanting. We could afford to hire some help for the heavy work. We could make sure Thomas has every opportunity when he grows up." Sarah thought about it, about the mother who had loved her but had been too weak to stand up to her new husband, about the childhood home she had fled. "If we take the money, I want to do something good with at least part of it. There must be other women like I was, desperate and alone with nowhere to turn. Maybe we could help them somehow." James smiled and pulled her into his arms. "That is exactly the kind of thing I would expect you to say. We will figure it out together, all right? We will use this gift to build something good." Through that summer and into the fall, they made plans and improvements. James hired 2 ranch hands, young men looking to learn the trade, which took some of the burden off his shoulders and allowed him to spend more time with Sarah and Thomas. They added 2 rooms to the house, giving them space for the growing family they hoped for. Sarah quietly sent money to a women's charity in Philadelphia that helped unwed mothers, finding satisfaction in turning her painful past into help for others. Thomas took his first steps in September, wobbling across the kitchen floor into his father's waiting arms. He babbled constantly, attempting words and making Sarah and James laugh with his earnest efforts. He was a happy, curious child, fascinated by the animals and the wide-open spaces of the ranch. In November, Sarah realized she was pregnant again, and the joy on James's face when she told him was worth every moment of morning sickness that followed. This pregnancy was easier than the first, without the fear and uncertainty that had plagued her before. She had James beside her every step of the way, and she had the experience of having already done this once. Their daughter was born in July of 1878, a hot summer afternoon that contrasted sharply with Thomas's autumn birth. The labor was faster this time, and Clara pronounced it the easiest birth she had attended in years. They named her Emma Rose, and she had James's blue eyes and a tiny rosebud mouth that made everyone who saw her smile. Thomas, at 21 months, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and constantly asking to hold her. James built him a step stool so he could stand beside the cradle and watch Emma sleep, and Sarah often found her son there, talking softly to his sister about the horses and the dogs and all the important things in his toddler world. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. The ranch prospered, the herd growing and the sheep James had brought in proving profitable. They became one of the most successful operations in the area, known for quality stock and fair dealing. Sarah ran the household with capable efficiency while also maintaining her kitchen garden and learning to help with some of the ranch tasks. James was respected in the community, often called on to mediate disputes or offer advice to younger ranchers just starting out. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who could ride almost before he could walk, his father's patient teaching making him confident around the animals. Emma was a sweet-natured child, quick to laugh and slower to anger, always wanting to tag along after her older brother. In 1880, Sarah gave birth to another son whom they named William after James's stepfather, and the house was full of the noise and chaos and love that they had both dreamed of. One evening in the spring of 1881, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Sarah and James sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark days in Philadelphia 5 years earlier. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked softly. "If you had sent me away that day when I told you the truth?" James's arm tightened around her. "I try not to think about that, because the idea of my life without you and our children is unbearable. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah Callahan." "You saved me," Sarah said, turning to look up at him. "You and your impossibly generous heart. You looked at a desperate woman carrying another man's child, and you saw a family worth fighting for." "I saw a brave woman who deserved a second chance," James corrected. "And I saw an opportunity to build the life I had always wanted. You saved me too, Sarah." From loneliness and isolation, and a future that looked empty no matter how successful the ranch became. They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, and from inside the house came the sound of William waking from his nap with a cry. Sarah started to rise, but James stopped her. "I will get him." "You rest." Sarah watched her husband disappear into the house and listened to his voice, soft and soothing, as he comforted their son. Through the window, she could see Thomas's room, where he was supposedly sleeping but was probably reading by candlelight, and Emma's room next door, where their daughter would be clutching her beloved rag doll. This was her life now. A strong, loving husband, 3 healthy children, a home that was truly hers, and a future full of promise. She thought back to that terrified woman on the stagecoach, pregnant and alone and certain she was heading toward a marriage of cold convenience at best. She wished she could go back and tell her younger self that everything would not just be all right, but would be better than she had ever dared to dream. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing children. Thomas proved to be a natural rancher, following his father everywhere and absorbing lessons about land management and animal husbandry. Emma showed a talent for music, and James bought her a piano shipped all the way from Denver, the sound of her practicing filling the house with melody. William was the wild one, always getting into mischief and keeping Sarah on her toes with his adventurous spirit. In 1883, Sarah gave birth to twin girls, Grace and Hope, and the ranch house erupted into joyful chaos. James hired a woman from town to help Sarah with the housework and the babies, refusing to let his wife work herself to exhaustion. The older children doted on the twins, and Thomas, now 6 and very serious about his role as oldest brother, appointed himself their guardian and protector. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the largest and most successful operations in Wyoming territory. James was elected to the territorial legislature in 1885, giving him a voice in the governance of the growing region while still maintaining his work on the ranch. Sarah became known for her charity work, never forgetting her own desperate circumstances and always ready to help others in need. Thomas grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's green eyes and a quiet competence that made everyone who met him respect him. When he was 16, James took him aside and told him the truth about his birth, about the man in Philadelphia and the circumstances that had brought Sarah west. Thomas listened quietly, and then he hugged his father and said simply, "You are my father in every way that matters." The rest is just details. Emma married a young lawyer from Cheyenne in 1895, a man who loved her music and her gentle nature. William went east to university, studying engineering and writing long letters home about the marvels of electricity and the possibilities of the modern world. The twins grew into beautiful young women, both staying close to home and helping Sarah with the ever-expanding ranch household. Through it all, Sarah and James's love deepened and strengthened. They had weathered hard winters and dry summers, cattle sickness and financial difficulties, the everyday struggles and triumphs of frontier life. They had built something lasting together, not just in the ranch and the family but in the bond between them. On their 20th anniversary in 1896, James took Sarah back to the spot where she had told him the truth, where he had looked at her desperate situation and said those words that had changed everything. "Then I am already a father." "I meant it, you know," he said, holding both her hands and looking into her eyes with the same love and intensity she had seen that first day. "From that moment, Thomas was mine. You were mine, not by force or obligation but by choice, and I have never regretted that choice for a single moment." "I know," Sarah whispered, tears sliding down her face as they still did so easily when her emotions ran high. "I have loved you since that moment, I think. Certainly, I have never stopped loving you since." "You are the best man I have ever known, James Callahan, and I thank God every day for bringing me to you." They held each other as the sun set over the ranch they had built together, the house full of children and grandchildren now, with Thomas and his wife visiting with their 2 little ones, and Emma and her husband arriving tomorrow from Cheyenne. The land stretched out around them, productive and beautiful, a testament to years of hard work and careful stewardship. Sarah thought about that frightened girl on the stagecoach, pregnant and alone, heading into an unknown future with nothing but desperate hope. She thought about the cowboy who had looked past convention and judgment to see a family beginning, who had claimed a child not his by blood with a fierce protectiveness that had never wavered. She thought about all the years between then and now, the struggles and the joys, the ordinary days and the extraordinary moments. "No regrets?" James asked softly, as if reading her thoughts. "Not a single one," Sarah replied, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "Not one." They walked back to the house hand in hand as twilight deepened into night, the lights from the windows spilling out in golden rectangles across the porch. Inside, they could hear laughter and conversation, William arguing good-naturedly with Thomas about farming techniques, while Grace played with her nephews and Hope helped with supper preparations. This was the life Sarah had been given, the second chance she had been brave enough to reach for, and James had been generous enough to offer. A mail-order bride who had confessed her desperate secret, and a cowboy who had responded with words that echoed through their decades together. "Then I am already a father." Those words had been a promise, and James Callahan had kept that promise every single day since, building a family not just of blood but of choice, of love, of unwavering commitment. And in that family, surrounded by the children and grandchildren who were the legacy of their love, Sarah had found everything she had never dared to dream of: home, belonging, and a love that had stood the test of time and grown stronger with every passing year. As they stepped into the warmth and light of their home, James pulled Sarah close one more time, kissing her temple and murmuring the words he said every night. "I love you, Mrs. Callahan." "And I love you," Sarah replied, as she always did, and would continue to do for all the years remaining to them. Today, tomorrow, and always. The door closed behind them, and the ranch settled into peaceful evening, the mountains standing eternal watch over the land and the family that had claimed it, the legacy of a cowboy's generous heart, and a woman's courageous choice to trust in the possibility of redemption and love.